Up from the neck up.
Amen. Hey, this is a day that God made, and I'm here. You allow me to be here.
Absolutely.
God is good.
Appreciate you, brother, being here. I tell you, I ran into a lady the other day. You're talking about, and she said, you sound familiar.
Yeah, I have had that.
Yeah, but then she went on and said, your co-partner, Dr. Bradley, I love that guy.
God.
Yeah. I said, well, let me, before this conversation go any further, because she had this big smile on her face.
Yeah.
I said, he is married.
Thank you, brother.
She said, no. I just like his insight, and I said that's why he's there to give you that checkup. But no, she was
very. I appreciate that.
Yeah, but it just goes to show you, like I said, the phones don't have to be blazing off the hook.
No, you never know. You never know who's listening.
Yeah,
and this is a very important service.
Yeah,
we do a lot of things here, man.
It was strange. She's like, it's funny because I was listening on the way in, and Pastor Hobbs had our show playing, and I turned on the radio expecting to hear him, and it was the Mamleo broadcasting. And in fact, it was I'm like, this sounds familiar. It was us. So, before we go any further, I want to thank our sponsor, Guaranteed Rate Mortgage Company. For all your mortgage needs, give branch manager Cora Holbrook a call at area code 781-342-0242. Guaranteed Rate Mortgage is located at 75 State Street on the first floor in downtown Boston, Mass. The zip code is 02030 and 02109. And matter of fact, next Saturday with the actually, folks, the workshop today has been postponed until next Saturday at Mamleo, the first time home buyers workshop. So it's been postponed. We had a little hitch in the programming there, so it will be next Saturday at Mamleo headquarters at 1:30 in the afternoon. So I'm going to run from about 1:30 to 4:30. So Cora's going to stop by here, and she's going to she sent in to see what you guys wanted.
I was going to ask you the question. She's coming in, man.
She will be able to fly. Yeah, she will be able to fly. Matter of fact, if you would text me your order, you and Pastor Hobbs, so I can send it to her. She's going to, matter of fact, she's going to stop someplace different today. She's upgrading it, so be at Panera today.
Oh, really?
Yes. A little tinkle in your eye there. So, like I said, for give her a call. Like I said, they're just phenomenal people. We want to thank them for their sponsorship here at the Round Table Mamleo. So, a lot going on, my brother. But before we go any further, I'll pass Hobbs over there and give us a little prayer, and then we'll keep.
Yeah, Pastor, we need the word of God here, man. We need to bring God into this and let him have his way. Ask him to have his way. We can't let him do anything. We're going to ask him to have his way because we definitely need it.
Yes.
Indeed. Father God, we do thank you for your grace. We thank you for your mercy. We are grateful to know that you are all powerful and a very present help on the time of need. And we ask you just to bless this broadcast, bless this day, God. Bless all that's said and done. Be glorified in and through it, and we'll be careful to give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, a lot going on, my brother, Dr. Bradley. And just here in the city, the officer involved shooting this week. And I'm a little concerned that our elected officials are not engaging in a manner. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in this hour as well, because also there's an interesting way that Philadelphia police department is dealing with their shootings and how they've kind of not ratcheted up a little bit, and they've realized that there's a connection, like they really focused on their homicides, but now they're turning, and we're going to listen to a little of that, and we're going to talk about that. But the lack of response that I've seen, it's troubling for me as someone in law enforcement, as well as you're retired from it, but your wife is still involved in it. That's something of that nature. The acknowledgement and nothing said from our leadership here. It's
leadership as it relates to the political leadership.
Well, unless I missed it, I heard nothing yet from the mayor. The only person I heard speaking out, in matter of fact, he had a press conference. And I understand it's a political time, but is the acting DA, Kevin Hayden, was the only person who actually I saw make any statement as it relates to that. And I'm not saying you have to speak to the facts of what happened, but the fact that this was an officer involved, that someone fired at law enforcement here in the city of Boston, that it should be troubling, because if you're willing to take on the police in that manner, the public,
the average citizen stands no chance.
Yeah, so
stands absolutely no chance.
Yeah.
But I think you have to also understand that this is a reflection on where we're standing as, a family unit. When you have young men who are doing what I heard this individual just circling around, it all starts at the family level. So when you start tearing away at the basic fabric of society, by actually going in and exercising your hatred for a segment of society, but through mass incarceration, through 3 strikes you out, through all those things that actually make your prison population higher, and for one particular group. I mean, America has more people in prison than any other in developed nation. This is the result of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we go any further, we want to make some acknowledgement. We want to say a hearty good morning to Harry Scales and the brothers and sisters at Prince Hall, continuing to do their work there, getting those shots and to our folks and helping out in the community. So thank the brothers and sisters there. Also, good morning to our friend Mary Franklin there, who, like I said, always good when she calls and checks in and says she's feeling well. She's feeling well, all the time. So thank her for that. And
well, brother, listen, I want to make sure I'm clear here. Instead of us going to Indiana came to us, because I got a message from Brother Bridgeforth that says good morning,
we got to get him to call in and just, because folks probably think he's an imaginary person, right? That he's like, where's Waldo? That people think he doesn't exist. So, Brother Bridgeforth, we know you're listening. Give us a call. Just check in, say hello. Let folks up here in Beantown know that you're okay. 617-282-0685 is the number there. 617-282-0685.
It'd be nice talking to you, brother.
Yeah, exactly. Just let us know what's going on down there in Indiana. Indiana, here we come.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and for other folks, like I said, if you want to give us a call here at the station, 617-282-0685. 617-282-0685. So like you said, there is just so much going on. Things have really changed and ratcheted up to where, like I said, where, but I mean, you had the former president who said that, that he could go down in the middle of Times Square and shoot someone and get away with it. So maybe other folks are following his lead.
Well, if the law was supposed to be a rule of law, it has to apply to everyone.
Well,
but I just see it as, and unfortunately, this individual was probably a person of color who discharged at the police officer, right?
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. I think it's unfortunate under any circumstances. To be, I'll make sure I'm very clear, because if you can do that to an officer, the average citizen stands no chance.
Right.
But from my perspective, as I'm looking at it, when you start tearing away the fabric of society and dismantling the very basic building block to overall society, all respect for laws, all respect for rules, all that stuff starts in the home. If mommy is too busy being mommy and daddy, there's no one to groom.
Well, right. We've seen this school year. We've seen, like I said, it's been out in the news lately. We've seen more guns being taken out of the schools. We're seeing a lot more assaults in the schools. As a matter of fact, the mayor was visiting one of the schools this week, and that there'd been a principal assaulted. And while she was there, unbeknownst to her, a staff member was being assaulted. So this is not going away. Unfortunately, it's not going away. Fortunately, I should say, it's not going away. And I think the approach that folks have been, I get it. We don't want a prison to pipeline. But what we also need to be able to do is, as a parent as well as I, that if you don't get out in front of the behavior of young people.
Well, Larry, listen. What you and I and Pastor are black men, and we came up in a system that repudiates our very presence. But we're here as God-fearing, society obeying citizens, law obeying citizens. So what did our parents do to put us into this situation? I can tell what my parent did, because what happened? If I had a problem, I got tightened up real quick. And not only did I get tightened up, I'm not advocating child abuse, but I am advocating, give the parents the flexibility to instill discipline, so that the respect for rules of the family will be respected, because rules of the families translate into rules of society, which we call laws. So I'm really, I think that this is the result of actually just tearing down the family, the black family in particular.
Right, but I think what's happened is, as you alluded to, we came up in the same era, right? That everyone in your neighborhood, your neighbor,
it was a village,
was your parent, was a co-parent, right? And so as people started having children at younger ages, right, there was that it was lost in the translation, right, where these young people didn't have the same parenting skills as our parents have. And it's so now instead of them being parents, they wanted to be buddies with their kids. My mom, George, probably said the same thing. Kids were seen and not heard.
Absolutely.
Right.
And when you were heard, they made sure that you understood that this is the relationship. Right. You are not to be heard.
Exactly. When company came over, you didn't sit in the room with grown folks.
No, you didn't.
You didn't have a conversation.
Because the level of conversation was probably too much for your mind.
That's right.
And that's how they felt about it. And they were trying, in essence, now that I think about it, they were trying to protect me in their own way.
Right.
Protect me and also instill into me that there's rules of this house,
right.
and those rules are laws in this house. You don't break them, and you break them, you're dealing with me.
Right.
Well, if you break the rules in society, you're dealing with the criminal justice system.
That's right.
And so when you have this undercurrent effort to actually dismantle the black family or the Hispanic family or the family of color, because those individuals should not be benefiting from the fruits of society. Right. Then what ends up happening, they become a menace. Right. They become a difficult issues for the overall public.
Well, and it also, in the broadcast, in our 8 o'clock hour, Dr. Bradley, you are going to love this. It's this piece I heard on NPR. It's called "Rejecting Assimilation." This young lady said, "You sound like a white girl." You have to hear her rejection of wanting to assimilate in white America. I think you're going to enjoy this piece as much as I did.
Okay.
That we're going to talk about that.
Oh
man,
it's a difference between assimilation and integration.
Right, she's a Hispanic girl. So whenever Pastor Hobb has the Philadelphia piece ready, we'll play that for you, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. But I tell you, with the violence has already seen an increase in other cities. Boston has been fortunate, but we're starting to see it elevate here.
But
so
brother,
we're not immune.
We're just on the crust there, just on at the edge of the spring.
Right.
Imagine when we get into the summer.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right.
When the weather is conducive to outdoor activities.
Right. So this was a piece on NPR. Philadelphia police are trying a new strategy to bring down the murder rate. And Pastor Hobbs, we're ready. We'll play it and we'll get your response.
Higher murder rate persist. Philadelphia broke its all-time record for homicides in 2021. And this year the pace is only slightly slower so far. So the police department is trying a new strategy, asking detectives to work harder to solve shootings that do not kill anybody. Here's NPR's Martin Costi.
15 person got one of the shooting, put him out, shot.
Lieutenant Dennis Rosenbaum has 26 years with the Philadelphia Police Department, 12 years as a detective. And he's never seen it like this.
My phone goes off all night long. Triples, quadruples, quintuples, one after another.
Right now, he's arriving at the scene of a double shooting outside a Chinese takeout place on Susquehanna Avenue. Other detectives have already marked out the trail of spent shells. Rosenbaum looks at the pattern.
1, 2, 3, then ran up, 4, 5, 6, shooting up the street. Obviously, at some point, he takes out that window. All the projectiles, when they eject 7 to 11 feet back into the right.
His guess is this was a run-by shooting. Both victims were hit in the foot, not very seriously, and are getting medical care. And that's what's different here. Even though nobody died, the police are investigating this as if somebody had. Rosenbaum is a squad commander in a new citywide team that investigates non-fatal shootings almost as intensively as homicides. They do ballistics, a neighborhood canvas for videos.
2 detectives will go to the hospital. 2 detectives will come here to process the scene. We're modeling a lot of our things after what homicide does.
The chief of detectives in Philadelphia is Frank Venor. He says the reason they're putting more effort into solving non-fatal shootings is that it might actually deter fatal shootings.
If we start to see a group of shootings, if we don't get a few people off the street, that'll continue until somebody wins.
This approach is based on research. Philip Cook is a professor of public policy at Duke University with an emphasis on criminal justice, and he's studied non-fatal shootings.
Whether the victim lives or dies in most shooting cases is a matter of luck.
It might just come down to aim or how close the ER is. And yet Cook says whether someone dies tends to determine how hard the police work to solve that crime.
The one thing that we found in Boston is that for every type of evidence, there was simply more of it being collected in the case of a homicide investigation. And certainly the caseloads for the investigators was quite different.
Almost all police departments solve homicides at a higher rate than non-fatal shootings. That's pretty normal. But the gap in Philadelphia is especially big. Venor says so far this year, they've cleared about 51% of homicides, compared to 25% for non-fatal shootings since the new unit started 2 months ago.
I expect and I believe that clearance rate will rise. I looked at Denver. Denver did this. Their clearance rate went up pretty substantially. I think we'll have success.
But if this strategy is going to deter homicides, people need to be aware of it. And right now, the news is still filtering out to the most affected neighborhoods. At a free food distribution in North Philadelphia, Reuben Jones of the community group Frontline Dads is intrigued to hear about the police taking this tack.
I definitely think that makes sense. One thing we know, the data shows that almost half of those shootings are retaliations. Let's do more of it and really hold people accountable.
Back on the overnight shift, Lieutenant Rosenbaum is now at another scene, using his flashlight to count bullet holes in a victim's car.
He's got one in the windshield, one in the driver's side door.
It's another non-fatal. The driver's in the hospital, wounded in the buttocks. He told police it was a road rage incident, but Rosenbaum doubts the story. He wonders if this is linked to the earlier shooting outside the Chinese takeout. It's a completely different part of town, and he says under the old system, investigators might not have looked for that connection.
And then those guys would be in their silo over there in Central Division. Now we're all together. We all sit around in the same area, our desks are all near each other, they all talk, and that's what makes a big difference.
But Rosenbaum also acknowledges that you don't get something for nothing. This citywide team has pulled detectives away from other jobs, such as robberies and burglaries. He says you just have to set priorities.
You're just moving the resources around, you got to adjust. We had to adjust with 1,800 shootings. We had to make a change. Hey, if it doesn't work, we go back to the old model. But let's try it.
2 months into this strategy, the police department says it has seen a small improvement in the percentage of non-fatal shootings that it's solved. But Rosenbaum says people should give them at least a year to see whether improving that number can also help to bring down the city's homicide rate. Martin Costi, NPR News.
All right, there you go. Philadelphia police are trying a new strategy to bring down the murder rate. Do you think Boston should? And actually, they reference Boston and then what Boston's doing here. And I think Boston does a good job. But like you said, what they're saying is that they realize in other big cities like that, and if you don't get out ahead of this, if you don't get out, someone that's shooting at someone, their intent is to kill them. And we're just fortunate, and it really hasn't been treated in the same way. And so what they're saying now is that we should be looking at this different. Do you think that approach would be helpful here in Boston? I don't know, call it 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. Dr. Bradley, I want to get your take on that.
Well, I do agree that investigating non-fatal shootings is a very important part of the game. But what interests me is the lack of cooperation. How do you address the lack of cooperation in the community around providing necessary information to conduct a thorough and equitable and fair investigation on the issue? Or do you put all that on the police officer to actually put? What I'm trying to say to you is that I think having a relationship with the community was such that the community feel that this is an important piece of the policing process will facilitate a thorough investigation of this type. Other than that, I think it's going to be, again, it's going to require a lot of police resources, because most people don't do this in front of law enforcement officers to kind of dig up and pull back the layers of the investigation. I'm not saying to make the police officers life easier. What I am saying is that a good, healthy relationship with the community will facilitate the investigation. But I do think that they're onto something here, because we tend to put more emphasis on, because of the heinous behavior and the loss of life, and it's really offends the sense of security and safety in the community when someone is killed. But I also think that non-fatal shooting, that matter has to be resolved, because you are going to deal with retaliatory behavior.
The lieutenant in there alluded to the fact that it comes at a price. that they're taking resources from other types of crimes, right? Bringing these detectives in from other places. So it's now you have to prioritize.
Right.
So how do you strike the balance? But particularly when the number of people that are going into the field of law enforcement has declined. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, Chicago, for instance, they would normally, when they have their police exam, have over 55,000 applicants. They had less than 3,500. The people that took their tests.
Yeah, I think that's only going to be for a matter of time. Though. I think so. Yes, I do. I think what's happening here in terms of police recruiting, I think it's because what we're feeling is the results of the George Floyd and other types of heinous, crazy situations in policing. That's not the norm, especially here in the city of Boston. Our police officers are usually very well educated beyond the academy,
and very well trained.
And that's where I'm going.
Yes,
so there you have the academy requirement, but you also have an education incentive that most officers capitalize.
But can you speak to that training component, because you were the registrar at the Boston? I think the only person of color, the first person of color to have it, to hold that title, and you could explain to folks what that position is. So you had a front row seat on the training. Could you just, for our audience, explain to them a little while what the registrar is and the type of training that Boston has increased, but when you were there?
Well, the registrar is responsible for the workings of the academy, making sure that all the things are done, correctly. All the training is actually done correctly. We're adhering to the rules and the regulations and the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the United States as it relates to training our police officers. They're also involved in determining what type of training we're bringing into law enforcement. One of the things that I wanted to do under Charles Horsley, I wanted to do two things. I wanted, number one, and they did it. The first one was to provide in-service online training to officers who are actively in police officers, thereby, mitigating the impact of overtime of budget, to train our police officers. Another thing I wanted to do, which I'm not quite sure they're there yet, is provide ethics in policing and in criminal justice training to officers at the very beginning of their career. Right now, from what I understand, I might be wrong on this because it's been a while since I've been around there. That is still not happening yet, and I think it's a very critical part of law enforcement, understanding, where your morals and your values and all those things come from, and also understanding how that influences your decision in law enforcement and influence your decision to tolerate things that should not happen in law enforcement among your peers. So that's pretty much what I did there. But I think, having the necessary training to make sure that the officers are constantly doing their job correctly, and it's a fair, equitable process for not only the officers but the community, and understanding what the officer having an understanding what the role the community plays in providing or assisting in the safety and the security. We have eliminated that whole piece. We have this us versus them attitude, but in actuality, when you look at how policing was structured in America, it was based on the Metropolitan Police Act of 1829 with Sir Robert Peel. And Sir Robert Peel created 7 or 9 Peelian principles. Number 7, and I'm going to paraphrase it, says the people are the police and the police are the people. Meaning that there's a relationship here. We have actually walked away from that and kind of segregated ourselves as it relates to the police are the police and the community are the enemy, and that is not how policing should be structured in America.
Well, it makes me think about something interesting when you said that about, police are the community are the police. You probably remember this as well. When you walked into the academy on both sides of the step up, particularly where the recruits entered on one side of the building, and on the steps leading in when I came in there, it had community policing on the steps. It was the first thing you saw when you entered the building, right? And I noticed that, and it spelled out what that meant. But I noticed that over the years, that had faded. So to your point, right, that definition, and I don't even know if it's there any longer.
I mean, and unfortunately, it's fading in the daily operation of the police department. See, that is the problem. You know what I mean? Right. Because again, how many folks speak to people that they do not know. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about a situation that is, I'm already traumatized by what I witnessed. And now I got this guy coming in asking me questions. Number one, he may even look like me in terms of my culture. We may be able to relate, but I don't know you.
Right.
See, that's one of the things that happened and I'm a student of history. I go right back to the walking beat mode as opposed to the vehicle patrol. You know, one of the things that August Vollmer, who was the father modern day policing for America, he was to America policing what Sir Robert Peel was to England policing, British policing. But what I'm saying here is that he advocated vehicles. We have to have vehicles and take the officer off the street, take him away from the potential corruption, have vehicles as a part of our patrol paradigm, so that the officer will be able to get to the call for service quicker, that the officer will be able to catch the individual in the perpetrator in the act. Well, we know that most crimes, that when the call comes to the police department, the crime is usually old. First of all, so you're not going to do that when you're going riding through the community. And the most important piece, that the vehicle created a barrier between the community and the police officer. So now oftentimes you have community people who do not know the officers who that are patrolling the sectors on a daily basis until they come in and ask for questions.
And to that point you're making, I remember when I came on the job, you're right. The police department had kind of shifted from that type of walking beat to, I remember the police cars had rapid response on the cars. Everything was priority, boom, getting the officer to the scene. And we had gotten away from, really, you see very few walking beats, except for maybe in, big city, commercial areas and things like that. But the walking beats that used to be in the neighborhoods, the officer.
I didn't know. It didn't happen. I mean, I understand logically when you look at it, you would say, well, you're taking this officer from the community so he's not exposed to the corruptive behaviors that he should be enforcing. So I would rebuttal that, but say, well, what type of people are you hiring? You know what I mean? If someone's going to be easily influenced by the corruptive behavior, maybe we should look at our selection process. That's the first hit. And the second hit is that when you put that officer in a cruiser, what is happening, you are now you're interrupting that interaction between citizen and police. That interaction is critical because if I know what's going on, in the community, I know the players, and that's not to say that everyone's gonna love the police department. I'm not advocating that. What I am saying is that you're giving most people an opportunity to know their officers, and most people are law-abiding, peace-loving people. Because if that wasn't the case, then we couldn't be able to control it anyway, because we're vastly outnumbered. You know what I mean, as it relates to population versus police department. That's my hit.
You're listening to At the Round Table with Emmanuel. The calling number here is 617-282-0685, 617-282-0685. We're talking about policing here. Have we gotten away from what worked, the model? And we're seeing police departments around the country shifting their focus. We're seeing a decline in people that actually want to be police officers. We're talking about the training as well. As Dr. Bradley was a registrar, which said was overseeing the training component, and when he was on the police department, part of his duties at that time at the registrar was this training. Full disclosure, I'm a member of the Post, the Police Oversight Standard and Training certification for law enforcement, a newly formed commission to oversee policing statewide, and part of that is working in conjunction with the MPTC, which is Mass Police Training Council. They're responsible for implementing training that is across the board, so that everyone's training is unilateral and interesting, because in my new role, I'm finding out, because I thought that everyone, pretty much, if you were alone, you shake your head, you already know the answer, right, had the same training that we have in Boston. Boston Youth Academy is 6 months. I thought everyone went through 6 months, but a lot of the police departments in these smaller towns, some of them had auxiliary police officers, and they weren't required, but they had the same police powers as everyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
they were learning by osmosis. To be honest with you, pretty much how they were
right, or on the job training.
Yes,
and this is not a profession where that would definitely is a good idea. So,
and more seriously, you know, you're right about that. It's not a good idea, but it also it damaged the image of policing and quality of policing in the mind of the citizens who interacting with this individual who's never trained to be a police officer. I just want to put that out there.
And you're absolutely right, because you know I remember traveling, and it's been several years since I was in my family in Mississippi, and we've seen some of the places where particularly the pay was not something that people was a living wage for law enforcement. And I'm not saying you have to make millions, but it was like, who do you think you're going to attract? I remember New Orleans was a perfect example how lawless it was.
I had interactions down there, in New Orleans.
The cops, you didn't know the difference between the cops and the robbers because they were one and the same.
Most of the time, I'll give you a good example. I was in New Orleans on a conference back when we were doing when I was actually redesigning, working with Casey to redesign the 911 center in Boston. So he and I were actually down in New Orleans on what we call an APCO conference, which is an association of public communication officers, communication centers. And so we're at the Superdome. And so we go out and enjoy the evening and have some food. It's excellent food down there.
Yes,
and I got kind of disoriented. Did not necessarily know exactly. I wasn't too far away from my hotel, but I didn't know exactly in what direction the hotel was in. Well, I wasn't, you know, one can argue that maybe you had consumed too many
hurricane, they call it, down there.
But it really was. I just got turned
not the
around.
Storm, the hurricane.
I just got turned around. So I'm a police officer in my regular clothes, you know, have my identification. I walk up to this officer and I asked him, you know, could you help me out? I'm a Boston police officer. I'm from the city of Boston, and I'm here on a conference. Could you help me out? He said, sure. You know, you give me $20. I was like, excuse me? I'm asking for directions. You know, no, $20. We don't make that kind of money. I was like, oh man, come on. You know, so I have directly experienced. You know what I mean? You know.
Well, no, the federal government had to come there several years ago, and they had Chief Pendleton actually came in. I mean, the corruption down there, but I mean, at the time, in comparison, I think a police officer in New Orleans was making $11,000, and somewhere in Boston was $50,000. So you see the disparity, and you say, well, it's a little cheaper. It isn't that much cheaper to live down south than it is here. And sure, at $11,000, who do you think you're going to be hiring to go out there? You know, and so people are using it to benefit themselves.
See, I personally believe that the citizens of this country, of this great nation, requires and should expect and should demand a professional law enforcement officer. There's a certain level of professionalism, certain level of decor, a certain level of behavior that comes along with that title. We have seen policing as a vocation as opposed to a profession. But as it transitioned to a profession, also the compensation got to be commiserate to that movement, to that transition. Because if it's not, you're not going to attract the high quality people. It's just not going to happen. And we also, Mr. Post Manager, we also need to think about, and I'm just putting this out there, I'm just saying, we need to think about what is the academic requirement for our entry level police officers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Are we looking for a high school diploma, or are we looking for associates or a bachelor's degree?
Well, that's interesting, because that conversation has come up in a public setting, is that some people are in the mindset that you should have a advanced degree, should have a college degree to become a police officer. And where I don't disagree with that in principle, but in reality, I knew that would exclude a lot of people that look like me, because most of us of color, and even most people, if you look at it, obtained their degrees after they became police officers, because then they could afford to do so.
Well, why not make that a requirement then?
What's that?
If you're on as if your entry level is a high school diploma, at a certain amount of time you have to have this, you have to achieve this.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. And I don't have a problem with that language, but I think what some folks wanted it to be, you know, on the front end, and it's like that would preclude a lot of people. The only reason that they don't have a degree is because they cannot afford it. When you think about it, even in the state school, you know, the average price is somewhere around $40,000, right?
Yeah, student loans.
Exactly. And then I know I was looking at, I think it was BC or BU the other day, that they were saying they're raising theirs, that it's going to be close to $75,000 to attend those schools. Well, okay, if I have to go and spend $300,000 if I want to go to BU to then have a bachelor's degree to become a police officer, the likelihood is that most jobs that you have coming out of high school or at that age are going to afford you the opportunity. And then I graduate and all I really have is a huge load of debt. And there should be some, if you're going to require that as well, then there should be some financial assistance from the city of town.
How about an associate's degree then? Going to a community college to become so that way you get the foundation, the very foundation of our criminal justice system. You start to understand the three foundational pillars of the system.
It's not the degrees that I'm objecting to. It's because I realize that even an associate's degree, just think about today in today's environment, Dr. Bradley. If I'm just struggling to pay my bills with now the increase in gas and food and all of that, right? Even if I want to go to Roxbury Community College and that might cost me, $750 a semester, where am I going to find that $750?
I hear you.
That's what I'm saying is that if you're going to require
and all those other things,
that's what my point is that there are people who would love to do it, but financially it's prohibited. That they don't have the assistance, right? And I think sometimes we look at it from the seat that we're sitting in, right? That if our kids wanted to go to college, it's pretty much because of what we've done, right?
I mean, I commend you for that. Just looking at it from another perspective, there's no question about that. But I do think that we need, if we're going to improve the level of professionalism, we have to improve the level of academics.
But that's why I said I like your standard of saying, okay, you get on now. You've got. Here's the benchmark, right? You've got 7 years to get your bachelor's degree. You've got 4 years to get your associates, right? So then, but now I'm in a position where I can afford to do so.
Yeah,
I mean, it can become a priority. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be required. I just see that the barriers it would put in front of people who financially, not that they don't want to obtain them, they just financially can't afford to do so.
Okay, but I think there's today it becomes you have to do it. You have to have the internal desire to go in and get the degree yourself. I came on the job with not in law enforcement, but I came on the job with a degree because I had my internal desire to get it. I think if you have a practice where you can enter in as a recruit with a high school diploma, but within X amount of years you must have obtained this level or you will be released.
Right.
I think that's the way to go. It addresses both sides.
I'm fine with that. But that's a fair assessment. But also, I think the cities and towns that are also should be able to help you with some assistance.
Oh, absolutely.
But also that, particularly here in Boston, with the amount of tax breaks we give to colleges, they should be assisting the city in educating their police department. They're not helping educate their kids, right? So at least educate some component, give something back for the tax advantages that you're giving.
Well, I'm happy to hear that the conversations are happening at the post level.
Absolutely. No, it's a huge consideration. And that's the only drawback that I had was that looking at it from a financial, not that it should not be a requirement, but realistically, it would preclude a lot of folks that look like us, not because they're not intelligent or they're lazy. It's just that they can't afford it. So good morning.
So your station in life is not preventing you from becoming, a law enforcement officer because you don't have the necessary resources.
The financial means to do so, and that's because if you look at it today, that's a huge barrier, right? Where most of the folks that are going to some of these premier colleges around here, they don't even live in the city. They're a stone's throw away from a lot of these universities and colleges, but yet they can't afford to go.
Well, brother, we just solved the problem. We just solved the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Bumping heads. Good morning, caller.
Bumping ball heads.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Pastor Dan. How are you?
Hey, Pastor Dan. How you doing?
I'm fine.
Good.
I think that you're overlooking a very important part of this.
Which is
the compensation for the police officers. It needs to be double or triple so that you do acquire the best people. I say that about school teachers, police officers, firemen, people who run to the problem as opposed to from the problem. They need the pay just needs to be so high or commensurate that you're going to pull from the best people. I was in Manchester, Connecticut last night. Not Connecticut, but Manchester, New Hampshire last night. My wife was attending a concert, so I had time to clean my truck and do some things that guys do. And was looking for a car wash that had, a car wash so I can use the vacuum cleaner. So I saw a local Manchester police officer cruiser, so I flashed my lights at him to try to get him to pull over. He wouldn't. I followed him up to, pretty much, I almost followed him like 4 blocks and around. Finally got next to him at a light, started to roll my window down, and he drove away. No call, so I caught him at the next light. He rolled his window down, and I said, "Excuse me, officers, I'm looking for," I said, I'm a visitor to your area. I'm just looking if you know where there's a car wash. Mm-hmm. And he just gave me a look like, how dare I interrupt whatever it was he was doing?
Well, Dan, I can tell you right now why that happened. We knew you were going to be in Manchester. We gave them a heads up that
do us a favor.
We gave them your plate number.
Professional courtesy.
Well, you got your money's worth.
So they had already been warned. So it was personal. No, but to your point there, no, I understand that, and believe me, I get it, but I could honestly say that here in Boston, most police officers are doing financially, do have to work harder. Yeah, could the pay on the front end be better? Absolutely. There's always room for improvement there. But I think the key component of why Boston is in a way is really the training, that even prior to the post requirements and the MPTC training component of it, Boston was already doing it ahead of the curve. A lot of police agencies around the country would come to Boston.
Yeah. I think it's two pieces. I think it's and I was a registrar of the academy, so I can really attest to this and stand firmly on solid grounds when I say this. The quality of training in the Boston Police Department Academy is excellent. Yeah. The quality. There are some things that I think they need to add.
Always room for improvement.
Yeah, they need to add to training. Ethics is a huge one. Yeah. All right, that's one piece. I think the other piece is the education incentive that's actually incorporated into the bargaining contract between the city of Boston and the police union. Right. I think that also encourages officers to go beyond the academy training and get the necessary academic training, understanding, so they understand, Supreme Court decisions like Mapp v. Ohio, Terry v. Ohio, exclusionary, all those things that actually have a very good, that we have in our toolbox, but they have a thorough understanding as to how that can work to actually help you prosecute the case.
I want to get your take on this as well, because see, one of the things when I was saying to you about the education piece, right? Because here's another piece that is going to be a factor, particularly for people of color. Now, Randolph was hovering somewhere around 10% people of color. It's close to 70% people of color.
More than that.
Right. So, but Boston has a residency requirement if you want to become a police officer here in the city of Boston. We know that it is becoming not achievable to be a resident in Boston if you're a person of color, right? So now we have, okay, if I need to have an educational piece on the front end, but I also need to be able to afford to live in Boston on that end, right? So you see what I'm saying? I'm putting so much.
It's not doable.
It's not.
It's really not doable.
At some point, we have to even look at the residency issue. Is that you want me to be a police officer in Boston, but I can't afford to live here because most of the infrastructure and housing that they're building, 99% of it is not what some people deem affordable. Depends on your pay scale, because all these high rises like the Seaport and areas in Boston, even the redesign down in Parcel 18 on Mass Avenue there where they're going to be building, there's very little carved out for affordable. But even as a police officer, if you're paying for a one bedroom $3,000 a month, how do you save any money
to go to school,
to go to school, to buy a home, to live in the city.
I mean, those are social problems that we have to kind of work through. We have to work through.
Right.
But I do feel when we go back to the education piece, if we're going to have a professional law enforcement agency, an office, an agency that actually exudes professionalism, we have to have a better educated practitioner.
No question about that. But we also have to aid you. And let me give you a quick example of that, Dan, and I'll let you weigh in. Is that with the new standards from the POLST, Police Oversight Standing and Training, which I sit on as a commissioner, it came up, part of their certification is physical ability, right? That you have to pass a physical test, right? And it is a requirement in there. And my pushback to that was, okay, I don't have a problem with that. And it's somewhat based on your age and everything. But Dr. Bradley, you and I both know that most of the Boston police officers can't even walk up a flight of stairs, a lot of them, right, that are up there in age. And even some of the younger ones now, we're finding, even this last class that's going in the academy at the end of this month, a large portion of them could not complete the physical training aspect of it that's on the front end, right? That I think it's close to 100 of them did not pass. They're going to get a second shot at it. And these are young people. But because of the lifestyles they live very sedentary lifestyles now. It's place they, we used to have to walk through if we wanted to talk to a friend. We didn't have all the things. I say that because if you're going to require this, then you have to have something in it. And what I brought up was the state police have it built in their contract that they have an hour a day on their shift to work out. We don't have that, so you can't hold people to a standard that you don't give them the opportunity to do.
When I came on back in the 20th century, I mean, well, you could say that as well.
Yeah.
I had to maintain my weight in proportion to my age. So I could not go overweight, or that would be terminating my contract. My employment, rather.
No, that's not in BPD. But I'm saying is that the state police have it built in their contract. That they have an hour every day. So now I can hold you more accountable if I'm giving you the time. Like this, that's the point I'm trying to make here, is that if I'm going to hold you accountable to that standard, then I must say, okay, well, we give you an hour. If you don't take advantage of it, if you're just sitting in your cruiser for that hour, you don't take it. When it comes up for the physical component of it, if you can't pass, we've given you the same thing with the education piece. If we're saying to these college institutions that we need you to set aside some slots for police officers because we want them to be educated, but better educated. If you're not doing your part, then we hold you accountable, but give me the tools to build it. Dan?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. You can't hold somebody. Well, you shouldn't try to hold somebody to a standard that you're not making your own sacrifices for them to achieve. It would seem to me that's common sense. I'm surprised to hear that there isn't. I mean, there isn't a set aside part of your day that you expect to be trained or be training,
and that's
both physical and both. Yeah,
and that's the point. That the state police, it's in their contract, and that's what I said. So I said to them,
let me ask you this question.
Let's use that standard.
Let me ask you this question: is there any statistics around anything in the way of knowing how often state troopers exercise that hour?
Well,
no pun intended. How often do they actually use that hour for
Let me say this to you. Remember when the merger of the state police, the registry,
and the metropolitan,
right,
NBC, yeah.
You could immediately identify who was a state trooper originally, and who was merged in. If you look at state troopers, you see them, right? All their uniforms are the same, and it's very rare. If you see a state trooper that's out of shape, it jumps out at you. It jumps out at you because you're like, that's not normal for them because they do take that time and it's required because they have every year they have a standard that they have to meet. They have a physical.
There you go. I'm saying you have to have some type of consequence in place if you do not take.
But the reason why they have a consequence is because they have an ability, and they're saying we give you an hour to use. And if you don't use it, we're going to hold you accountable. So that's the difference.
But my other hit is that what impact would that have on the quality of 911 services if the officers are actually exercising? How would that be? Would that have an impact on response time?
No, because your manpower would. If you know that everyone on the shift has an hour, so you've got another. If I hired one additional person per shift, right, to that swing person to replace that officer during that hour, that solves that problem.
Okay.
Right, even if it's two people.
I just think we need to have thought we need to think through that,
but,
because we are very 911 driven.
We are,
in the city
but
of
that's
Boston.
what I'm saying. But you cannot put the burden just on the officer to fix the problems you're burdening them with. Is saying, okay, you need the education.
But I think there's one more problem that maybe you've addressed and I didn't hear it. It's one thing to train or to get the frontline people in order and get their minds right, as it were, to doing the best job. But when you have a hierarchy that you both have spoken of numerous occasions that still wants the good old boy or the old guard theory, how is that ultimately going to play out?
Well, I think here in Boston, because we haven't stabilized at the top who the next police commissioner, it's been over a year now that we haven't had anyone in a permanent position there. That has really slowed down what's going to happen, because I think folks are really just maintaining now rather than moving things forward. And we're in a critical situation here where there are so many new changes. Like I said, the police oversight standard and training, that goes into it's already in effect, but the certifications start June 30th. The 31st is the last of this year. And all these departments have been tasked with getting their folks ready for that. The training that has to be.
What is the consequence if you do not? You are not.
Well, there are several potential consequences as decertification, that you won't be licensed to be a police officer.
But what is the consequence for the leadership, for the organization?
Well, that's it. See, this is where it's. That's why I said that double-edged sword is that. Because now it is incumbent upon you, because it's your personal license, it's your livelihood, that you have to take some initiative as well. So if you know that, you need to get to the academy. So a lot of people, historically, Dr. Bradley, they avoid it if they can, and if there were no consequences for the avoidance. And I think there are still people who believe that of that mindset, that there now are consequences, and no one has actually seen them yet or been the beneficiary of those consequences, so they still believe that they're not in existence. Come June 31st, they will. And the other thing is that what's interesting is that it's right because of the volume of people that have to be certified. Currently, it is only officers from A through H for this first round. So it still gives departments more time, but a lot of departments weren't even aware of that because the questions weren't asked. So they didn't do it even formatted to where I would have been targeting my folks who fell into that category.
But as a former command staff member of the Boston PD, I can tell you that a couple of things with that. Number one, if you're going to have any type of change, you must have someone in leadership who's going to put a face on that change.
Right.
All right. If you don't have that in the Boston PD because you're like a ship without a rudder, then there's absolutely nothing as relates to policies and practices that are going to be implemented in the PD to actually realize those changes that you're talking about.
But also, even if the mayor is, indicating, we've got a couple of minutes and Dan will give you the final word, is that if they bring someone from the outside, the learning curve is even a lot harder and longer. So even if that person comes in, they're not going to be able to hit the ground running. There's so much they have to absorb on top of this new performance that your department must undertake. So I think that I'm not sure if an outside person right now
would be the wise thing to do.
Just because you're so much further behind. And I don't understand why the two finalists of candidates, the current mayor Wu and Asabi George, who was at the time the two lads, that they knew one of them was going to be the mayor. There's no reason why that during this process they shouldn't have already had a lot of that vetting done so that they could
hit the
shortly after they take over.
I agree with that. That's what you call foresight, but that's necessary.
I know above my pay grade. Dan, any final words? And you should definitely listen. You want to listen to this piece we're going to play in the 8:00 hour. Definitely. Any final words, Dan? You're still in.
Well, I think you guys are right on. I think when it comes to this type of thing, I still don't see the hierarchy of the Boston Police Department taking the information and taking the knowledge that folks like yourself have when it comes to some of these particular problems. So they're doing what they've always done, and they get what they've always got.
Well, this knowledge is packaged in the wrong wrapper. That's probably it's in the wrong paper. Exactly. That's why they're not listening to it.
Well, they listen to certain people, and that's what I'm saying. Is that sometimes people don't want to hear opposing views on the issue, and they see it as
agitating.
Right.
Well, I would say what King said is that little black agitator in the washing machine that gets the clothes clean.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Right, but they say you're causing a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, you have to. You have to do what you have to do, and if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got.
Yeah,
amen.
That's why we're so. And to top it out, we've got a piece we're going to play. Rejecting assimilation. You sound like a white girl. This is a very interesting piece. Young lady said,
Boy, I probably could narrate that piece because I hear it. I hear it so much. As a matter of fact, I can even relate a story where, actually, nobody ever knows my voice on the phone anyway. So I get,
So it's a very interesting listen. We're going to play it at the top of the hour, but I tell you, it really caught my interest when I heard it, and I felt like we should share it with our listening audience, because a lot of people are under the impression that you need to assimilate, and they said, "Hey, I'm not even trying anymore. I'm going to just move on, .org."
Well, carry on, gentlemen.
All right, thanks, Pastor Dan. Pastor Dan Walker here. Sounds Travels heard from here every Wednesday from 8 to 9 a.m. here on Boston Praise Radio and Black News. Boston Black News. I tell you, I've just been enjoying this. Place lights up during the week.
Rejecting assimilation.
Yes, rejecting assimilation.
All
right. So we're going to take our break. And we'll be back at the top of the hour. You've been listening to At the Round Table with Mamleo. Right, when you see something fast.